Hey guys, so I came across this article today in my Facebook feed, and I have not been doing this in a long time with making these unscripted videos where I just look at something and comment on it. But this one was so crazy that I said, you know what, I've got to make a video on this. So here it is. This article came from somebody called A Science Enthusiast. Um, I suspect that this person doesn't know anything about science. Usually when someone's logic is this bad and they say, well, I believe in science, what they really mean is they believe in these tidbits that they've heard about science, and they usually have no understanding of how science actually works. So the person who wrote this, like I said, it's called A Science Enthusiast, or that's the publication, and they said, have you ever gotten your dad so drunk that you could trick him into having sex with you? They did in the Bible. So that's the caption before you even get the title of the article. Now, my response to this that I wrote down was, have some cultural awareness. When Lot's daughters raped him, this was regarded as an evil thing. Just because something happened in the Bible does not mean that God approved it. Okay, so this is something that people have a really hard time with. Just because you record that something happened doesn't mean you approve of this thing. It amazes me how incapable some people are of basic logic. So, I know that atheists and Christians will disagree on a lot of things, but I mean, some basic, you can have a basic level of using brain power. You can have a basic reading comprehension. You can have a basic level of trying to understand what's being said. If you choose to be foolish like this, and you want to act like you're in first grade, then, I mean, it's not my job to try to convince somebody. To quote Ayn Rand, who is ironically an atheist, it's not your job to save everyone's soul. And it's not my job to try to convince this person. I assume this person's probably never going to watch this video. There might be some atheists who watch this video, and whether or not they choose to change their mind, whether or not they choose to use their brain, whether or not they choose to actually think about things, it's not my job to make them think. If they just want to say neener, 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 you're stupid, like they're school children and run away, if that's their level of maturity, then it's, why do I want to, why should I try to run after them? That's not my job. My job is to give answers for people who actually want to think. So if you're somebody who's a skeptic of Christianity, you're welcome here. I'm really happy to have you. I love engaging with people. If you're an honest skeptic, you're somebody who actually honestly wants to know truth, and you want to be honest with yourself, by all means. I'm very happy to talk with you. If you're somebody who just wants to be an internet troll, as the author of this article clearly is, then it's not my job to try to convince you. If you don't care that you're on your way to hell very quickly, if you don't care about eternity, if you don't care about truth, if you don't care about ultimate reality, then I can't help you. And to be honest, I really care about truth, and that's partly why I was a science major in college. I have 2 science degrees. So we talk about being a science enthusiast. I definitely am. The question is, are you? And is the person who wrote this article? So I am going to actually read the introduction to this. This article is called 10 Crazy Bible Stories That Christians Conveniently Ignore. And they put a meme up here saying, I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet, and it says Timothy 2:12. It doesn't tell me if it's 1 Timothy or 2 Timothy. They don't even know how to quote a Bible verse properly, so there's that. And that's one that they'll come to later, so I'll wait and hold off on my commentary on that verse. So they start off with, it's a strange phenomenon. I've noticed that Christian apologists generally have a worse understanding of the Bible than atheists. It's full of horrible stories that counter the notion that the Christian version of God, and this little g God here, is all-knowing and all-powerful. So they've asserted a lot here, but they haven't really put together an actual argument. You see that a lot where people will make a huge claim, and then they act as if it's your job to disprove this claim. And that's just not the case. It's their job to back this up. They have nothing here to back up the actual claim that atheists have a better understanding of the Bible than Christians. Now, I'll say there's a lot of stupid Christians out there, and it's something that really annoys me. This is especially true where you have these lukewarm, postmodern Christians who don't actually read the Bible. I also see this a lot in Christian circles where people might have their own pet theology, and they've never read the Bible. I think part of what can help with that is people listening to audio Bibles, in addition to reading a physical Bible, because when you listen to an audio Bible, you get a much larger context. You start putting things together in ways that you wouldn't just from physically reading. But then reading the Bible physically with the page in front of you, you're able to dissect those details a lot more. So, I mean, I've seen some people say, well, audio Bibles are bad because of this and because you don't get all the detail. And I'll say, well, hold on, it's not a dichotomy here. You can have both. And so I think that biblical literacy is something that is very much lacking within the church. However, this person who wrote this article, they clearly lack a very basic understanding of the Bible, considering the fact that they're like, oh, well, a bad thing happened in the Bible, therefore God must approve of it. So, I mean, basic reading comprehension here. Hashtag school choice. If God knew that humans were going to screw up being humans so badly, why didn't he stop it before it got started? It stands to reason that he was not all-knowing in that instance. If God wanted to manifest himself on earth, why did he have to make himself a fetus inside the Virgin Mary? And of course they put virgin in quotes here. It stands to reason that he was not all-powerful in that instance. Well, why does it stand to reason that he was not all-knowing and not all-powerful? They don't really put together an argument here. Since they didn't really bother putting together an argument, I'm not going to bother trying to put together an argument for them. I don't owe an explanation to an objection that lacks any sort of coherency. Also, this is not one of their 10, so I mean, they're basically complaining about something without there's no logic here. There's no logical steps involved in what they're trying to say. Why is there something wrong with God becoming a fetus and walking along with humankind? You know, part of the reason Jesus did that was because he said he wanted to be with humanity, wanted to come down to our level because he loved us so much. There is also a lot involved with the moral aspect of things where the first Adam screwed things up. God knew it was going to happen. He's outside of time. He saw it. And so God saw that. But in order to pay the price for that, you had to have a human being paying the price for Adam's sin. And that's why God the Son had to become human. And there's a whole theology in that. That's something that people can get way into. But just throwing out these little, tit for tats, I mean, why? I mean, this is on such a low level that it's not, there's not really anything here to respond to. It's just, I don't like the fact that God became human. Why did he have to become human? Why did he have to lower himself like that? Well, he chose to. So, I mean, just because you don't like that doesn't mean there's a problem with it. Also, the title of this being a science enthusiast, there's nothing here that violates science. So, I mean, there's really not a lot to respond to here. And they go, of course, neither of these things actually happened, but that doesn't stop hundreds of millions of people around the world from believing that they actually did. They've just been indoctrinated from a young age to believing whatever their priest says. This is a huge whitewashing of a very large group of people. We don't accept this when people are talking about a particular ethnic group, or if you were saying this about Muslims, but criticizing Christians in this way is considered politically correct. I personally know quite a few scientists with their PhDs who grew up agnostic, or who were agnostic at some point in their lives, or were even full-blown atheists, who said, you know what, I don't think God is real, evolution is king. For a lot of them, it was after they got their PhDs or after they got their advanced degrees that they said, you know what, I think I've been wrong about a lot of what I've said. They started looking into the evidence, they started looking into other arguments, and they became Christian. So, I mean, sure, there's a lot of uneducated Christians out there. There's a lot of Christians out there whose intellect leaves a little something to be... Oh, shoot. Oh, no, I am recording properly. Okay. For a minute, I thought I wasn't recording. So, anyway, there's a lot of Christians out there whose intellect leaves a little something to be desired. The same could be said of atheists. So, let's keep going with this. Of course, they have a t-shirt with a bunch of religious symbols and it says fiction. Oh, and then it keeps going. And what? You expected most Christians to actually read the Bible? Psst. Sadly, a lot of Christians don't read the Bible. That doesn't mean the Bible's not true. So I put together a top 10 list of Bible verses that many Christians ignore or may not even be aware of. Okay, so is this Bible stories or is this Bible verses? Because after all, the best way to become an atheist is to actually read the Bible. Of course, that's why atheists are always running around on the streets handing out Bibles. No, this is why atheists keep trying to ban the Bible from all different sectors of public life. I mean, they fight so hard to keep people from reading the Bible properly in colleges and schools and places like this. Atheists do everything they can to keep people from reading the Bible. If reading the Bible were the thing to make people an atheist, you would see atheists printing out Bibles and walk around the street handing them out even more than the Gideons do. So I remember the first time I heard this, a guy said in one of my classes, oh yeah, the best way to make somebody an atheist is have them read the Bible. I wanted to invite him, hey, you want to come with me and walk around on campus handing out Bibles? Didn't quite do that, didn't know the guy very well, but I definitely thought about it. So, number 10 here is, it said 1 Timothy 2:12. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man, she must be quiet. And then, of course, has the meme which just says Timothy 2:12. I'm assuming he's quoting this correct. I didn't look it up. And that's the thing with a lot of these atheist articles. They'll say, look at this awful thing that's in the Bible. If you actually look at the Bible verse, you'd be surprised how often they completely misquote it. It happens a lot. This is not a Bible story. It has nothing to do with science. So, there's really not much here. You might not like this. This might offend modern sensibilities, but there's nothing here that's objectively factually wrong. So you might say, hey, I don't like that women weren't allowed to speak in church in this particular time, but that doesn't make it false. And your personal preferences, reality is not going to rearrange itself for your personal preferences. Just because you don't like something does not mean it's untrue. Just because you don't like something does not mean it's not good. There's a lot of people out there who don't like broccoli. That doesn't mean it's not good. That doesn't mean it's not good for you. So I'm going to keep reading the rest of what he says here on it before I comment further. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. And this person says, I've tried using this verse when I have arguments with my wife, but it's not very effective. Yeah. There's a certain context here. And a lot of times atheists will say, oh, you Christians just say, oh, there's context and then there's no further explanation. What happened with the first century church is there were a lot of problems with somebody speaking in church, and then a woman would want to ask her husband a question. She would want to say, hey, I don't understand, can you explain to me what he's saying? This would cause chaos within the church. So a lot of things had to happen where they had to say, hey, if somebody is basically giving the sermon in church, be quiet, hold on, wait to ask your husband about it at home. This was in a time period where usually the men were more educated than the women. And we might not like that, but they didn't really have the... You have to understand that in the ancient world, you didn't always have all the resources to educate everybody. And there is more to this, obviously. Like, there's different roles for men and women in creation. There's different roles for men and women in the family. There's different roles for men and women in society. There's different roles. Newsflash, men and women are different. They're made for different things. The man is the one who's meant to go out there, hunt the deer, bring it down, drag it home, and provide for the family. He is the one who's generally meant to be the one building the house. Men are the ones who are meant to go off and fight war if war needs to happen. Women are supposed to be protected. It's a man's job to protect women. That's part of why God gave us strength. You might not like that the Bible gives different roles to men and women, but that doesn't mean that women are being demeaned. It doesn't mean that women are being regarded as a lesser creature. It means that women are being cherished and they're being held as somebody of value. I know in Islamic society, this is not the way it is. Women are regarded as almost being property. That's not the image you see in the Bible. It's actually been commented quite a bit that Jesus elevated women. Now, there is a lot to be said about what is the role of men and women in the church, because this is specifically talking about within the church. When it says that a woman is not to teach a man, the word for teach here isn't a word for teaching mathematics. It's not a word for teaching microbiology. I had lots of female professors, and that wouldn't be considered a problem biblically. And I don't think that there would be any Christian college that would say, no, a woman cannot teach a microbiology course. What you have here for the word teach is a very intimate word for teach. In Christian circles today, we might use the word disciple. So you're taking another person, or you're taking, it should be like an older man to a younger man, saying, let me help you. Let me help teach you how to be a man. Let me teach you how to be better. Let me teach you how to follow the Lord. And that, like I said, this doesn't mean that there aren't places for women to rebuke men, or for women to say, hey, that's not appropriate. He shouldn't be doing that way. There are times where women, godly women step up and say, hey, this is not proper. But there's other times where it's meant to be one man intimately discipling another. An older man, a father figure teaching a son what is the proper path. And there's reasons for this. For example, if a man is involved in sexual sin, it's not the place for him to go to a woman for that kind of counseling, for that kind of personal, this is what I'm struggling with, this is what I'm dealing with. For one thing, that emasculates the man. That puts him in a place where he's having to be weak in front of this woman who he's not married to. This is somebody who should be going to a man who's older in the Lord, who can help him grow, who can show him the way, show him how to be a man. Now, I know we live in a society where we want to deny science. We want to deny that there's any difference whatsoever between men and women, physically and psychologically. And then we want to push, and then of course, there's huge contradiction because people want to mix in this transgender stuff. But in the Bible, men and women are created. Men and women are created for different roles. It doesn't mean that one's better than the other. They're both equal in terms of their value in creation. But the husband is meant to be the head of the household. He's meant to be the one leading the woman. And people don't like that these days. It's going to bother a lot of people. We live in a culture that's been very influenced by feminism, but just because that offends modern sensibilities doesn't mean it's wrong. And that's something that I think people really have to understand, that just because even if you're somebody who's an atheist, even if you disagree, please understand what's being said. It is not saying that women are less than men. At least give that much dignity. Just because you don't like what something is saying doesn't give you the right to misrepresent it. And at least understand where this is coming from. This is coming from a place of wanting to honor women and wanting to show them love and compassion and wanting to do right by them. Now, again, you might disagree, and that's fine, But please don't ascribe ill motive to somebody just because they disagree with you. Also, keep in mind, this is not a science issue. This is just because something offends modern sensibilities does not mean that it's wrong. There's nothing here that contradicts science. There's nothing here that's objectively false. So please keep that in mind. It's just because you don't like how something feels or something may feel weird to you doesn't mean that it's false and doesn't mean that it's morally wrong. So I hope I've explained that well. Maybe that's something I can explain another time in other videos. But I do want to keep going with this. So the next one, they go Deuteronomy 22:13-21. If a man takes a wife and after sleeping with her dislikes her and slanders her and gives her a bad name, saying, I married this woman, but when I approached her I did not find proof of her virginity, then the young woman's father and mother shall bring to the town elders the gate proof that she was a virgin. Her father will say to the elders, I gave my daughter in marriage to this man, but he dislikes her. And now he has slandered her and said, I did not find your daughter to be a virgin, and then it keeps going. Now, I don't know necessarily even that he's quoting these Bible passages correctly. I hope you guys don't mind. I'm skipping through part of this. And it says TLDR. The Bible says, I don't know what TLDR stands for. I don't care. It's probably some new internet thing, or maybe it's an old internet thing, and I just don't care to look it up. The Bible says to kill women who have sex before they get married. So that's basically his objection here. Of course, had he actually read the Bible, he would know that the Bible says to kill both the man and the woman who are caught in the act of adultery. If you go to some of these Muslim countries, you'll have a woman getting raped, and then she's given the death penalty for rape. You don't see that in the Bible. That's not what happens in the Bible. If a man and a woman commit an act of adultery, they were to be stoned to death. Now, this is specifically within the context of ancient Israel. This is within the context of God's covenant nation. So, it's explaining what a covenant is kind of more than what I can get into with this video. But basically, God owns the land. God owns the whole world. But for this tiny group of people, this group of 12 tribes in this very small area of land, God said, this is what the laws are to be. You're supposed to uphold morality. You're supposed to uphold it in this way. And this is meant to be within the context of the nation of Israel. You have to read the whole passage. If you just take one verse and you take it out of context, you can make anything sound bad. I could take something out of... I've actually found this interesting, that when I read astronomy textbooks, they'll talk about, okay, when the sun comes up, such and such. Obviously, this is speaking in terms of appearance. This astronomy textbook is not teaching that the Earth is in the center of the universe. But you could take things out of context in order to make it say something different from what's actually being said. And so that's what you got with a lot of this, is you have things being taken out of verses taken out of context and quoted in a vacuum. And that's a problem with anything. If you quote Darwin like that, it's a problem. If you quote the Bible like that, that's a problem. If you quote the Constitution like that, it's a problem. You can quote anything, any piece of literature out there, you can take something out of context and make it say something totally different from what's actually being said. It says, Christians like to dismiss this one by saying, oh, that's the Old Testament, we don't really pay attention to the Old Testament anymore since it was replaced with the New Testament. Following this logic, I guess the whole Ten Commandments thing should be ignored, right? That's in the Old Testament. And I agree, there are some Christians who use this bad line of reasoning. They'll say, oh, well, here's the argument. They'll say, well, that's the Old Testament, that doesn't really count. And they don't really explain themselves well. And a lot of Christians don't understand it properly because the gospel itself is rooted in the Old Testament. If you throw out the Old Testament, you throw out the whole purpose for why Jesus had to come and die on the cross. So it's more correct to say, hey, this is meant to be within the covenant nation of Israel. Just like commands not to eat pork and not to eat shellfish, that was given to the Jewish people. That was given to the Israelites. This was never given to the Gentiles. And you see that in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, where it says specifically, this law is for the nation of Israel. This is not a law for all people in all time. And I'm sorry if there's atheists on the internet who don't want to understand that. I also am sorry for people who have genuinely had questions, have genuinely been skeptical, and there are foolish churches that said, oh, well, never mind that, Johnny, trust in Jesus anyway. Because I definitely had that experience growing up. You're asking questions about evolution and dinosaurs and things like that. They'll say, oh, just trust in Jesus. So, the next one is Deuteronomy 25:11 through 12. Two men are fighting, and the wife of one of them comes to rescue her husband from his assailant, and reaches out and seizes him by his private parts. You shall cut off her hand, show her no pity. Yeah, she's asking. This is within the context of the nation of Israel. And again, they're really taking this in a vacuum. So his comment is back to back with the doot doot. Clever. Deuteronomy is probably my favorite parts of the Old Testament because you get a full dose of the crazy before people tone it down a bit to make it more palatable in the New Testament. It's also one of the... and it's just blank. He didn't finish the sentence. So he doesn't really make an argument here. There's nothing here that has to do with science. This isn't a Bible story either. This is a commandment given within the civil law of the nation of Israel. And again, you might not like it. It might violate your personal preferences. But your personal preferences and your personal feelings don't dictate what's true. Your personal feelings and your personal preferences don't don't necessarily dictate what's moral. Just because you feel personally that it's right to steal, or just because you personally feel that it's right to go cheat on your spouse with another person and not tell them about it and lie about it, you might personally feel okay with that. That doesn't mean that it's okay. Basically here you had a case of a woman sexually assaulting a man. So would you rather us just ignore sexual assault? Again, you might not like what's going on, but I mean, just because you don't like something doesn't make it wrong and doesn't make it not true. Now, you also have to remember that a lot of the commands that you see in Deuteronomy and throughout the law of Moses, some of these commands, there's no record they ever had to be carried out. For example, there's a law that if you have a rebellious child and they refuse to stop being rebellious and they're causing problems, that child is to be put to death. And we might not like that. We live in privileged 21st century America, where if a child is rebellious, we have a lot of options. But you have to keep in mind, Israel was a small nation, and they were surrounded by enemies who wanted to wipe them out. All of the empires that ended up taking over Israel, they tended not to be very favorable towards the Jews. I don't know of any exception to that. I mean, possibly the British eventually when they, conquered that part of the world, but even with that possible exception, the Jews were not treated well, and eventually they were conquered by outside nations. So if you had one child being rebellious, that could incite other children to rebellion, and that could destroy the entire social order that they had. And it was a very precarious social order. They couldn't afford to have it. They couldn't afford to have a lot of rebellion. Now, there's no record that any child was ever put to death because of this law. As far as we know, in ancient Israel, you had this law on the books, and because this law was on the books, it might very well have been a deterrent so that children did not rebel, so that children did not say, hey, I'm going to be this rebellious, nasty child. Now compare that to our society, where children are encouraged to rebel. And you think of how many children die every year from drug overdose, from problems, how many children get pregnant, how many children get STDs. We have a lot of problems in our society because we encourage rebellion. But again, I just wanted to use that as an example of just because you don't like something doesn't mean it's not true and doesn't mean that it's not good. So again, most of this really hasn't been Bible stories at all. So Matthew 21:18 through 22. This is the next one. This is number 7. And this is counting backwards. Early in the morning, as Jesus was on his way back to the city, one second to make sure this is still recording. It looks like it. Early in the morning, as Jesus was on his way back to the city, he was hungry. Seeing a fig tree by the road, he went up to it, but found nothing on it except leaves. Then he said to it, "May you never bear fruit again." Immediately the tree withered. When the disciples saw this, they were amazed. "How did the fig tree wither so quickly?" they asked. Jesus replied, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only can you do what was done to the fig tree, but also you can say to this mountain, 'Go throw yourself into the sea,' and it will be done. If you believe, you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer." And this keeps going. Now his comment is, Jesus straight up murdered a tree because it didn't have fruit on it for him at that exact moment. Keep in mind, there's a lot of atheists out there who straight up murder babies because they're inconvenient. This whole thing is nonsense here. Jesus straight up murdered a tree. You can't murder a tree. It's alive in the biological sense. It's not alive in the spiritual sense. And you see the distinction between that in Hebrew, where plants are described as being alive in one way, but that's more like of a biological life. And it's things like humans and dogs and basically higher animals, at least, are described as being alive in a spiritual way. So, people say, oh, well, the Bible says animals don't have souls. That's actually not true. If you look at it in the Hebrew, animals are described as having a soulish life to them. Now, I don't know if that extends to the insects or not, and I've asked about this, and basically what I've come back with, what people have answered me, is we really don't know. We don't know if a fruit fly is considered to have a soul in the biblical context, but that's something for another video here. But basically, Jesus straight up murdered a tree. Yeah, that's totally terrible. Jesus murdered a tree. I mean, come on here, guys. You're grasping at straws. So again, do the logic here. Jesus is God. Jesus is all-knowing and all-powerful. God got upset the fig tree didn't have fruit for him. God kills the tree because it didn't have fruit. Now you have to keep in mind, there is also something here where people are living in a culture that's very symbolic in their way of thinking. Jesus killing this fig tree, I've seen a lot of commentaries say this tree represents Israel. Israel wasn't bearing good fruit, therefore God was going to punish Israel. This tree was meant to be an illustration. This tree is not physically, it's not alive in the spiritual sense. It's alive biologically. So you can't murder a tree. But Jesus is causing this tree to wither because just as Israel is not bearing good fruit, just as this tree is not bearing good fruit, Israel is not bearing good fruit. And so God's judgment was going to come on them. Now, I haven't looked into that as far as I would like to. This is just something that I remember from sermons and Bible commentaries. So, I mean, feel free to look into that further, but did God not know that the tree was fruit-free? Then God is not all-knowing. Was God unable to produce fruit on the tree? Then God is not all-powerful. Besides, why would God need to eat food anyway? This is not worth answering. I've already answered it. God, in this case, God came in human form. Jesus had hunger just like a human being would, or just like any regular human being would. So, I mean, there's not a lot to respond to here. He boasts a lot saying, I understand the Bible better than most Christians. I got a friend I just went to lunch with today who's learning Hebrew. He's in Hebrew class number 2. So he's going to seminary, and because he wants to learn the Bible better. And he's taken his 2nd semester of Hebrew. Good for him. How many atheists who write for this website can say the same? How many of them are going out there to learn Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic? Probably not too many. Judges, this next one is number 6, Judges 14:6. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat. But he told neither his father nor his mother what he had done. Samson was walking with his parents when he saw, and then this person comments, Samson was walking with his parents when he saw a lion. He decided to rip the lion apart and not bother his parents with it as one does. And the problem is. So, I mean, what exactly are you objecting to here? I mean, what are you saying, that Christians don't know that people had to fight lions in the Old Testament? Keep in mind, this is a time when lions weren't necessarily an endangered species. Let's open this verse up here on Bible Gateway. Computer's not quite working as well as I would like it to. I have too many tabs open. Let me close a few. But, I mean, there's no real objection here. There's no real argument being made. He's just saying, hey, this guy killed a lion. Like, okay. And what's the problem here? I mean, personally, I'd rather lions never have gotten killed ever in the history of the world. But guess what? Humans and lions, their territory overlapped. The lions wanted to eat the food, wanted to eat the flocks from the people. Lions wanted to kill people at times. And, you know, of course, humans encroached on lions' territory, so you had the conflict between humans and lions. I mean, just saying, oh, this guy killed a lion. I mean, is this really the worst Bible story you were able to come up with? Is this really your big objection, that somebody went and killed a lion? So, again, I have to apologize. Actually, I'm going to pause this for a minute while I'm going to pause this recording. Alright, so my computer is acting properly now, and I was able to find the verse that was mentioned. So, the passage here is talking about Samson from the Old Testament. Samson was very strong, and if you're familiar with Samson, Delilah, cut Samson's hair and he lost his strength. A lot of this was because God was with Samson while he was obeying him. Anyway, I'm going to get right to this part. Because this particular article didn't go into Samson and Delilah and want to talk about Samson with a lion, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at this verse. So, Judges chapter 14, starting in verse 5, it says, Then Samson went down to Timnah with his father and mother, and came as far as the vineyards of Timnah. And behold, a young lion came roaring toward him. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, so that he tore him as one tears a young goat, though he had nothing in his hand. But he did not tell his father or mother what he had done. So he went down and talked to the woman, and she looked good to Samson. When he returned later to take her, he turned aside to look at the carcass of the lion, and behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the body of the lion. So he scraped the honey into his hands and went on, eating as he went. When he came to his father and mother, he gave some to them, and they ate it, but he did not tell them that he had scraped the honey out of the body of the lion. Okay, so that would have been considered an unkosher thing, so that would have been considered a not good thing to eat the honey. You know, they had come from this body of a lion that had been sitting around. But what is going on here is basically this man was attacked by a lion, and God made this man where he was strong enough where he could kill the lion. So a lion attacked a guy and he killed it, and I don't understand why this is considered such a... I don't understand what the objection is here. Why are you saying, oh, well, this guy was attacked by a lion and the guy killed a lion? You know, it's not like the guy just... They make it sound like he just walked up to the lion and tore it apart. There's not really an objection here. I don't... Like, did you actually read the passage? There's nothing here about, hey, how dare you kill a beautiful lion? There's nothing here about, well, how could a guy be strong enough to kill a lion? Obviously, there was the issue in the news recently where a young mountain lion had attacked a jogger, and the jogger managed to kill the lion. So, I mean, it's not like human beings have never killed large cats before. I don't understand what the objection here is supposed to be. I mean, some basic literacy, basic reading comprehension here. I mean, or give some basic argument. You know, instead of just, haha, the guy killed a lion. Like, what exactly are you objecting to? What are you saying is the problem here? So then Genesis, the next one is number 5. It's Genesis 19:30 through 38. I'm not going to go into real detail with this, but the guy's comment is Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm not going to read the whole passage here. The guy goes, Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed as punishment for the attempted rape of angels. Yes. And Lot's wife was turned into salt because she looked back. And can't forget that part. Can't forget that part. That really actually happened. Okay. So what happens next is Lot's 2 daughters conspire to get their dad drunk so they can get pregnant with father's baby. The Old Testament is full of a lot, and they emphasize full of a lot of incest, which leads to, and then the next one's Genesis 4, or sorry, number 4 with Genesis, a different passage. This is a mess here. This is a total mess. Just as I said before, just because the Bible records a rape doesn't mean that the Bible is saying that the rape is a good thing. There's a difference between recording that something happened and affirming that it was good. Now, anyone reading this passage, especially at this time, would understand that this is not the way things are supposed to happen. They would have understood this as an evil thing, and they would have seen, hey, Lot took his family, went to go live in that evil city, and then the evil in that city influenced his family. Now, these days, we live in a time that's very much like Sodom and Gomorrah, because evil is celebrated. Now, I reject the idea that people in Sodom and Gomorrah were predominantly homosexuals, or predominantly engaged in what we consider to be a gay lifestyle. That'd have to be a lot of people in a very small city. When you read the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, or when you read the account, rather, of Sodom and Gomorrah, this was an act of rape. It's been pointed out that rape, even in our society, and I apologize for talking about this, it usually happens between 2 heterosexual men. Usually it's one heterosexual man raping another heterosexual man, and it's not an act of lust as much as it is an act of power. Now, clearly the Bible also condemns homosexual behavior. That's something where we have multiple passages throughout the Bible condemning homosexual behavior. But what we see in Sodom and Gomorrah isn't so much homosexual behavior as it is an act of rape. So this was a very bad society, very wicked, and they mock the idea that God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. They're like, oh yeah, sure, God turned the wife into salt. You can mock that all day. But the fact that a supernatural miracle happens isn't contrary to the scientific method. It isn't contrary to what we know from science. Nobody has ever gone into a laboratory and proven that miracles can't happen. If you think that's the case, then your understanding of how science works is quite lacking. But they're saying, hey, there's a lot of incest here. Incest is bad. What you had here was a rape from daughter to father. Now, there's more that I want to say about that. There are things in the Old Testament, especially the early parts, with people being able to marry brother and sister without it being a problem. Those sorts of marriages were not outlawed till the time of Moses. However, I think I'm going to be getting into that with number 4 here. But again, just because the Bible records something does not mean the Bible approves of it. Hashtag basic reading comprehension. I'm sure you can go on eBay and still get I'm sure the Hooked on Phonics game is still probably around. Go on there, learn about your verbs, learn about your nouns, learn how to read, and learn the basic English language before trying to read something that's a translation from an ancient language. And you know what? Maybe I'm a little sharp with saying that, and I apologize if I'm being overly sharp, but I really do think the atheists out there need to have a lot more intellectual honesty than what they've had. So, Genesis 9:20 through 21. Noah, a man of the soil proceeded to plant a vineyard. When he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent. Yeah. So after the flood, Noah planted a vineyard, he got drunk, and he ended up laying naked inside of his tent. So, and this person goes, so yeah, this one is also weird. Noah, who was about 500 years old when he and his sons allegedly built the ark, this supposedly occurred about 4,500 years ago, you know, in parentheses, you know, since the same book says the earth is around 6,000 years old. But after this 500-year-old guy and his kids build a massive ark without any modern-day equipment or cranes, after getting the penguins in Antarctica to swim to the Middle East, after getting kangaroos in Australia to hop, skip, and swim to the Middle East, and after corralling dinosaurs like Tyrannosaurus Rex onto the ark, parentheses, yes, they actually think that the dinosaurs were on the ark, and after the flood, Noah just gets, I won't read that word, he gets effing wasted and passes out naked. And since there are only 8 people left on Earth after the flood, they start repopulating the Earth. A lot of stories in the Bible just sound like incest with extra steps. They didn't really bother. Obviously, there's a lot of objections here. What you have here is what's called hurling elephants. So it's throwing out a lot of huge objections all at once, which is more than what a person can actually respond to. Now, I have 2 rather long videos on my channel already where I talk about Noah's Ark, where I talk about how could all the animals fit on the ark, and also what about the freshwater fish and insects. Since I deal with this elsewhere, I'm not going to deal with it quite as much here. However, since they talk about incest and that was the main thing, that's what I'm going to address. Human beings, when they were first created, they were living for a very long time. They were living to an age that approached 1,000 years. So a lot of people object to this and say, well, how can that be true? How can people have lived that long? And you have to understand that this was a time when human beings had only recently been created. So our DNA was near perfect. Most people don't realize that even secular geneticists will say that modern day people are genetically inferior to cavemen. So the way we were in the past genetically was superior to the way we are now. What you end up seeing is it's almost Darwinism in reverse. So what you have is every human being is born with about 100 new mutations per person. Now, the way Neo-Darwinism is supposed to work is you're supposed to get a few mutations that pop up here and there, but they're somewhat rare. And then natural selection comes and filters out the worst of these and keeps the best. So you end up, that's where you get the phrase survival of the fittest. In reality, what happens is the mutation for every person, the number of mutations for every person who is born, they're just way too many. And most of these are essentially invisible to natural selection. So you end up having these near neutral mutations. So they fall within this narrow window that by themselves natural selection really can't detect. So you end up with death by 1,000 paper cuts. And Dr. John Sanford explains that in some of his videos and some of his lectures. I have at least one of his lectures on my YouTube channel. Feel free to go watch it. I'm not going to get into that really super detail right here, so I apologize. I'm just going to kind of touch on it and keep going. But because the world is perfect, because human beings didn't have DNA that was as messed up as it is today, having a brother and sister marry each other or marrying a cousin wasn't a problem. Basically, because the reason incest is bad is because you might have a guy and a sister and they inherit a lot of the same bad mutations from mom and dad. Now, most of these mutations are recessive, so say it's a mutation to cause Lesch-Nyhan syndrome, which is a condition that I talk about a lot in previous videos. I also have a website where I talk about Lesch-Nyhan syndrome. Actually, you know what? That's a terrible example because it's excellent. I apologize. That was the worst example I could give because it's X-linked. Anyway, go check out my videos for Lesch-Nyhan syndrome. Basically, there's a lot of genetic disorders out there that are recessive. So that means you might have a gene from mom and the same gene from dad. Maybe the gene from dad is broken, but the gene from mom still works properly, and that means you have a functional copy of that gene. Now your sister might be the same way, where she has a functional and a dysfunctional copy of that gene. Now when you get together with your sister and make babies, on average, for just that one particular gene, you're going to have it where, okay, about 1 in 4 kids will have 2 good copies of that gene. About half will have a good one and a bad one, and because you have, good one, bad one, good one, bad one. But then 1/4 of them will have 2 copies of the bad one. So, apologize, that was my phone. So with 2 dysfunctional copies of that gene, you don't have a healthy person. And a lot of people can die that way. So the problem is that our DNA is breaking down more and more every generation. And if we keep going the way we're going, human beings will eventually go extinct. So something has to happen. Either somebody has to develop a radically beautiful gene therapy technology, or Christ has to return, or something has to happen. But if human beings keep going the way we're going, our DNA is just going to keep breaking down more and more, and the human race will go extinct. And even if we were running around in nature getting eaten by lions and having to fight the elements, no level of natural selection could stop this. It could barely even slow it down. So what we actually see in human population genetics is totally contrary to Darwin, but it very much fits with what the Bible says about human beings having once been very healthy and now not so much. And this isn't something that was derived from the Bible. This is something that's directly observed in nature. We know that every human being that's born is born with about 100 new mutations. You can run the numbers. Now keep in mind, these are numbers that anybody can run, anybody with a background in population genetics. So, I mean, it's not something that just came from the Bible. It's not that, hey, we see in the Bible that people lived a long time and now they don't. Therefore, our DNA must be breaking down. It's something that's been directly observed in nature. We can observe in nature that the human genome is breaking down, and what we observe in nature is consistent with what we see in the Bible, with people having lived a very long time at one period in history, and now that is no longer the case. I'm going to mute this phone. There we go. So there's a lot that can be said about that, but like I said, this thing with Genesis chapter 9, they hurl a lot of elephants here. They just make a lot of objections, and there's really more than what I can actually respond to. However, a lot of these questions have been answered, and if somebody actually wants to hear the answers to those questions rather than just acting like a first grader on the internet, there's answers out there. Answers in Genesis is one of my favorite websites. I definitely recommend going there. I also recommend my website, which is greenslug.com. Slug is spelled with 2 G's. And if you're interested, I also have a creation search engine on blueslug.com. Now again, slug is spelled with 2 G's. Now blueslug.com, that's a science search engine where if you're a college student, there's a search engine there for you to help you with your homework. If you're a scientist, there's a search engine there that's searching the scientific literature. And if you want to see what creation scientists have to say, people who have PhDs in biology, geology, astronomy, etc., you can go to this creation search engine and it'll search what scientists who are creationists have to say on these matters. So I'm going to go on to number 3 here. It says, "And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food," and it was so. And this is from Genesis chapter 1, verse 30. And it says, following up on the whole ark thing, creationists believe that all animals before the flood were vegetarian. Yeah. And all of them well, not necessarily before the flood, but I'm going to read it and keep going. All of them, including T-Rex, they also believe this is how they made it through the flood, by eating plants they grew on the top deck of the boat. We'll just ignore the fact that if it's raining for 40 days, there's not going to be much sunshine for plants to grow. None of this is what creationists argue. This is not what creationists argue, and it's almost it's seriously ridiculous how ignorant these people are, where they can't even bother looking up the Bible verse. Now, for Christians out there, there's a lot of Christians out there that will object, say, hey, you know, Greg, you shouldn't be calling people ignorant. You know what? Basic reading comprehension here. The plants weren't necessarily grown on the top deck. Some of them may have been grown towards the top of the deck where you can have fresh vegetables. But this would have been more of a luxury thing than a survival thing. If you're on the Ark, and they were on the Ark for about a year, you can bring a lot of food and storage with you. And when the numbers are run, things work out just fine. The Ark Encounter, they talk about this a lot. Also, before the fall, animals were vegetarian. But after the fall, it's not necessarily the case that before the flood all animals were still vegetarian. That's not what the Bible necessarily teaches. When I went to the Ark Encounter, I found it very interesting that they had a display set up showing how you can have these boxes where moths could be taken care of, where they could be cultivated, and then these moths could be there was basically piping where the moths could go and end up in the lizard cages. So it was a way where you could feed a very large number of small reptiles all at once. And again, this is over the course of a year. This isn't over the course of 20, 30, 40, 50 years, as you see with modern day zoos. So, and also this is a lifeboat, this is survival. So a lot of what you see here in this article is personal incredulity, where they're like, yeah, sure, that's what happens, or I don't believe that. I don't see how that could be the case. So, I mean, just because you don't like something doesn't mean it's not the case. As for T-Rex, okay, yeah, you have big sharp teeth. They might not have brought specifically T-Rex on board the Ark, but they would have brought some kind of large theropod animal that would have been close relative of the T-Rex. So remember, we're bringing kinds, not species, and I go into that in my Ark videos quite a bit, so I don't really think that I need to go into that here. I have explained that objection before. If people choose to ignore the answers to their questions, it's not my job to save their soul. So here we have, the next one we have is number 2. It's 1 Samuel 18, chapter 18, verse 27. And they have a Lego thing here. So it says, wherefore David arose and went, and he and his men, and slew of the Philistines 200 men, and David brought their foreskins, gave them in full tale to the king, so that he might be the king's son-in-law, and Saul gave him Michal his daughter to wife. As we're starting this list out strong with foreskins. Except you're not starting this list out, this is towards the end. So I'm wondering, did they write this backwards and they forgot to do the editing? Now don't get me wrong, like I end up having typos on my articles sometimes too, but as far as I know, I've never stopped halfway through a sentence in the middle of a paragraph, as they did before. And it goes, basically David wants to marry a woman, but her father, parentheses, who happens to be the king, wants the foreskins of his enemies before David can get married, which is understandable. And obviously they're being sarcastic here. But the whole thing was a trap, because the king thought David would be killed in the process of gathering 100 foreskins, but he got double the amount of foreskins, and it says because foreskins. Yeah, just because a passage talks about foreskins doesn't mean that it's... What are they trying to argue here? That it's weird that it keeps talking about foreskins? You know what? This seems weird. I'll admit, it seems gross. But the ancient world was a very different place. And I'm not saying that it's not weird or gross, But what exactly is your objection here? If your objection is just that they talked about foreskins, well, foreskins are a thing. They exist. There's not really an objection made here. They're just like, oh, it's weird that they talked about foreskins. Okay, what's your objection? Actually put forth an argument here, and then maybe we can discuss it. But if your entire objection is just, oh, foreskins, I mean, then I don't know what you want me to say. Would you rather me saying, oh no, foreskins don't exist? Do you want me to go with some weird gender bender thing? I mean, come on here. Like, you go to school, study logic. I've got a logic textbook. Well, I think I let my brother borrow it. But anyway, go study some basic logic here. There's no argument here. There's no argument being made. It's just, okay, this is weird because foreskins. And is it weird that he went and cut off the foreskins and brought them to him? Yeah, sure. That definitely seems weird, especially by modern standards, especially by, you know, our standards of sanitation. But what do you want him to do? I mean, I guess he wanted a receipt. He wanted proof that he went and killed Philistines, and the best thing he could do is say, hey, cut off their foreskins, because they had foreskins and Jews didn't. So, I mean, you want him to bring back the heads? I guess if you need proof, that's the most practical thing I could think of, even if we find it weird by our modern sensibilities. So, I mean, just because you don't like something or just because you think it's weird doesn't mean that it's not true. So, I mean, if you're trying to argue that the story is false, you need to actually have an argument. But there's no argument being made here. So number one is this. It says Ezekiel 23:20. It says, to avoid controversy these holidays, Starbucks should place Bible quotes on its holiday cups. It says, there she left it after her lovers, whose genitals were like those of donkeys and whose emission was that of horses. Ezekiel 23:20. And we're going to look up this context here. There she lusted after her lovers, whose genitals were like those of donkeys, and whose emission was like that of horses. This person says, I can't say I've ever seen a donkey's penis before, nor have I seen the ejaculate of a horse. And I definitely didn't think I would ever type the previous sentence and post it publicly, but here we are. This person doesn't actually have an objection here. So, here, I'm going to pull up this Bible verse. It says, as for their names, Samaria is Oholah and Jerusalem is Oholibah. So what's happening here is God is looking at the nation, he's looking at Jerusalem especially, and saying, you've cheated on me. You've run after men who weren't even appealing. They weren't even somebody to run after. And so he's looking at how Israel has been unfaithful to their God and comparing that to a wife who's being unfaithful to her husband. Now, so this entire thing right here is, it's meant to be a metaphor in a very specific way. Now, I'm not somebody who's going to just say, okay, something's a metaphor and then move on. Basically, God is accusing Israel of cheating on him. And so this is something where you have to understand the context and have to understand what's being said. Now notice this person doesn't actually have any kind of objection. He just says, you know, I can't say I've ever seen a donkey's penis before, nor have I seen the ejaculate of a horse. That's his entire objection. He says, and I definitely didn't think I would ever type the previous sentence and post it publicly, but here we are. Now keep in mind, this is an agrarian society. Everybody and their brother had seen a donkey's penis at some point, and you know, I'm sure if you were breeding horses, at some point you might have seen a horse ejaculate. Guess what? This is reality. This is biology. Just because you don't like the animals have penises, I guess that's your problem. I mean, the fact that if that's your problem, buddy. I mean, I'm sorry, but this is your problem. Like, you don't, you know, are you not able to comprehend biology? Yes, some animals have penises. What do you want me to say? Like, there's no actual objection here. It's just, this is quoted in a vacuum. This Bible verse sounds weird because you don't have the context. You don't have the whole thing here with God saying, hey, you're cheating on me, you're not behaving properly. So, and then it says bonus is Exodus 21:20 through 21. It says, if a man beats his male or female slave with a club, and no, again, this is not even Bible stories here, really. These are like Bible verses that are just, quoted in a vacuum. And it says, if a man beats his male or female slave with a club and the slave dies as a result, the owner must be punished. But if the slave recovers within a day or two, then the owner shall not be punished, since the slave is his property. If your book of morals contains instructions on how to treat my slaves, then your book is not a valid source of moral code. What are some of your Then it says, what are some of your favorite Bible verses that Christians forget? Says you may also enjoy reading some other article. So anyway, so this Bible verse here. This is something that atheists love to do. They love to say, oh, the Bible says slavery, therefore the Bible's bad. Well, the Bible says slave, therefore the Bible's bad. There are verses in the Bible that talk about treating your slave as a human being. There's also verses in the Bible that talk about treating the alien in your land as a human being. A lot of people, they like to take a modern definition of the word slave and impose that onto the Bible. But that'd be an anachronistic fallacy. So you can't take American slavery and assume that that's what's going on when the Bible talks about a slave. Just like you can't take our modern definition of an alien, which usually means a space alien, and impose that on the Bible when the Bible's talking about a foreigner. Now, in the Bible, you'll have a huge range of definition when it came to slavery. So you'll have basically slaves in Egypt. The Jews, the Israelites were slaves in Egypt for quite a while. And I've heard a little bit of a debate about, they were in Egypt for about 400 years from what I remember, but I've heard that there's some debate about how much of that time were they actually slaves. But you see something like the slavery in Exodus, that's all you need to say that American slavery was evil. These were, in Egypt, people were regarded as not even being human. They were regarded as being basically less than cattle when they were a slave. And you saw the same thing in America. What you saw with slavery in America totally went against everything the Bible said about quote-unquote slavery. So on one hand, you'll have a slave that's regarded as being no longer human, and you'll have a whole spectrum between that and a servant who's free to leave anytime they want. And so there's a lot within that spectrum, and obviously there's different moral condemnation depending on what level is there. And there's different moral questions depending on how free is this person to leave this situation. And so that's something that really has to be understood, is that you can't just take our modern day concept, you can't take the modern American concept of slavery and assume that's what the Bible is talking about. Now, here, notice it says, if a man beats his male or female slave with a club, and the slave dies as a result, the owner must be punished. The slave here had rights, and you'll see that a lot throughout the Mosaic Law, where if you beat a slave and he loses a tooth, the slave is to go free. And that really would be a strong deterrent from beating your slaves in the first place. So there's a lot to be talked about in terms of what the Bible says about slavery. But even then, it's a term where we have to be really careful, because there's a whole wide range of concepts, and so we have to be careful not to anachronize and think that every time the Bible says the word slave, that it's immediately talking about what we had in America with typically a white person oppressing a black person and having this continue for generations to generation. What we see in American slavery, I can't think of any place in the Bible where you'd have any sort of parallel where that would be affirmed. The closest you have is what happened in Egypt, and God put a stop to it. So there's that there. I think I'm not sure what else I can really say about this article. This person just wants to quote Bible verses in a vacuum, and I'd be willing to bet that in some areas they know that what they're saying is nonsense. They know that they know what they're doing. They know that they're not interested in truth, and they know they're not interested in truth. They just want to, quote unquote, be right. And I always find that a strange phrase, because if I want to be right, then I want to seek out, okay, what is factually true. If I want to know something about how many lions there are in the world, and I say, oh, it's 5,000, and somebody else says it's 50,000, I say, oh, okay, well, let me go on Google and, find out. I don't say, no, it's 5,000. I heard it on the TV that it was 5,000. I mean, that's silly. Because maybe the TV was wrong. It doesn't mean that I was wrong for believing. I find this interesting because I don't think, okay, I'm wrong because I heard something and took their word for it. If I say, hey, there's 5,000 lions in the world, somebody else says, no, there's 50,000, okay, I'll go look it up on Google. And that's something I can go Google on my phone. I don't know how many lions there are in the world. I've never heard. I don't care right at the moment. But that phrase that people want to be right, it just, I find it very strange for that reason. It's more like people don't want to acknowledge that they might have been given bad information at some point in their life. And that might be because, hey, we've got the internet. But hey, this happened even before the internet. Anyway, I am going off on a tangent. I apologize. I don't think this person really cares about what's true or not. I think this person just wanted to get on here, make fun of Christians, take Bible verses out of context and say, haha, the Bible talks about donkey penis. Okay, whatever. If you think donkey penis is, the fact that the Bible says donkey penis, if that's all it takes for you to reject the Bible, then, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Because guess what? There's plenty of donkeys out there that have penises. I would assume about half the donkeys in the world that are born have a penis when they're born. So, I mean, if donkey penis is the thing that throws you off, then, hey. And you know what? Just for making it a GIF, because I know people might want to edit this, donkey penis. There, you've got another take of it. So, yeah, some of this stuff I really wish I could have gone into more detail. Wish I could have explained it more. Wish I could have explained it with more of a deeper reference to the Greek and the Hebrew and all of that. But I think the guy is definitely wrong to say that most atheists understand the Bible better than most Christians, because I haven't seen any evidence of that. To be honest, I haven't even seen evidence that most atheists understand logic properly. So, I just wanted to put this article out there as a example of. I want to put this article out there as an example of answering these sorts of objections. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it was long, but feel free to check out some of my other videos. I'll put some links around here. Check out my website, greenslug.com, but slug is spelled with 2 G's. Anyway, I think I've said enough about that for right now. Feel free to leave comments and check out my other videos. Feel free to email me. Check out my Medium profile. Anyway, this is Greg, out.